Donkey Kong Bonanza, I decided to look on my bookshelf and pick out something I haven't read in a long while. Actually, no. I've been reading this ever since I finished the Twilight Princess manga, which, by the way, is a great, great, fantastic series. One that I'm sure we'll be talking about in the future. But reading Ocarina of Time has been a really interesting kind of situation because reading this again, this is actually one of the first manga I've ever read. Reading it again kind of reminds me why I didn't get into manga as a kid and why I wasn't interested in like Nintendo manga specifically because I do think this is a pretty common thing for like hardcore Nintendo fans is that like nobody's really all that into the manga series, like we've had like really good like Nintendo comic adaptations, Super Mario Adventures, the Twilight Princess manga. Like, there are like good adaptations that exist, but I think like traditionally, growing up in like the 2000s, people were like more nostalgic for like the cartoons, right? They were more into like the Dick stuff and like Captain N or whatever. People actually like watch that. Remember the Zelda cartoon, right? People would actually watch and remember it, and like they would occasionally become memes, like with "Excuse me, princess," like stuff like that was pretty common. But the manga has gone under the radar, and I'm sure there's like a lot of reasons for that. Manga wasn't as popular in the states at the time, and um, just the fact that it's a single volume thing. But I think the core issue with Ocarina, as a series, is just like how poorly constructed it actually is.
Looking at Ocarina of Time, it's pretty clear, even from the get go, that this is a one off, volume of Nintendo manga. It's just covering the story of Ocarina of Time. And looking at it, going through like the text, like initially you'll be drawn in by like, the vibrant character art and the style and just like the look of it all. But eventually you begin to realize just how bad the pacing actually is. This is pretty common with a lot of these Zelda series, actually, is that they do a lot to kind of like to build up, the early sections of the story, with like the full color panels and just like, all these elaborate, like really cool, like character moments. And then it just kind of segues into like the events of the game itself. And that is where it falls apart because if you know anything about the games, like if you're picking this up, you are a Zelda fan. Like if you're playing the game, this is the big thing about like the Zelda manga, right? Because people who aren't already fans are not going to pick this up, and if they do, they're not going to understand everything that's going on, right? Like the entire point is that like this is something geared towards like hardcore fans of Ocarina, people who have played through the entire game. But like if you are a fan, if you are a hardcore Zelda fan, like you'll find yourself like really underwhelmed by a lot of the creative decisions they made. Like for me personally, there's just all these really weird sections that just don't make a whole lot of sense. I think the most notorious is the Volva one, where it's revealed that the dragon Volvagaya is actually some little dragon that, let's see if we can find it here, that Link found as a kid. Music for this is really weird. Yeah, so Volvagaya in the manga is supposed to be some little dragon all grown up that Link befriended when he was a kid, but that's not what happened in the game. He was a dragon resurrected from by Ganon. But in this version, like they really go with this whole like pet angle, right? Like, oh man, Volvagaya, he's my friend, I don't want to kill him. But like not only does that contradict the game, it also contradicts like the entire story up to that point. because like you don't actually see this when it happens in the story. When the whole like being a baby dragon thing is explained to you, like, oh, Link bought him at Castletown Market, and then he took him with him on his adventures. It's like, wait, when did this happen? How did this happen? How did they separate? Right? Like, where was the dragon? It's just like, it's such a weird contrived thing. It makes absolutely no sense. And the story is just rife with that kind of nonsense, right? You're specifically told that, like, oh, Link has to go to 5 temples, and then, like, you read the actual story. Like, yeah, weird thing about this game's pacing. Like, I think over half of it is like child stuff, and then it just kind of rushes through adult stuff. So like, when Link draws the Master Sword, he's just going from location to location, which look nothing like the games, by the way. He's going from location to location, and sometimes you don't even see the temple, right? It just cuts to him fighting the boss. And like, you don't even see Bongo Bongo. Like, instead, like, for some reason in Kakariko, he fights Shadow Link instead. And then, like, it's not even explained to you. Like, it's weird how this plays out sometimes, because you don't see the fire temple. The water temple, like, he just kind of meets Ruto in between chapters, and then they go to the water temple together to fight Morpha. The shadow temple doesn't happen. He just meets Impa, like, before the water temple. And then, like, he goes to the spirit temple, and then Noboru actually comes with him to Ganon's tower, and then just inexplicably disappears for the final fight, because, like, oh, she reawakened as a sage. And it's just like, huh? Like, there's it's so shocking going from Twilight Princess, which is legit a really well constructed, gorgeous manga, like, coming down to this, because this is just such a huge, massive step down in quality, and yet there's still like semblances of like really good aspects of the plot. One of my favorite bits, and I think this is something a lot of people would overlook. um you know, Link confronts Ganon on like the castle bridge, right? We all know the scene. It's like the opening scene of the game. It happens right before you get the ocarina. It's a huge deal. But like, one of the weird things everyone kind of like points to about that specific instance is like how weird it is that like instantly when you get the Ocarina of Time, you just kind of forget about like Saria's Ocarina and like the fairy Ocarina, and it never comes up again. With in this version, what happens is that like Zelda throws the ocarina at Link, and it does not go into the moat. But like, Link drops his ocarina, after fighting Ganondorf, and Ganon like thinks the fairy ocarina is the Ocarina of Time, and so he picks it up and just takes it while he goes after Zelda. And I thought that was an amazing explanation to that moment. That was a really good adaptation of a scene that just that is like a really good example of just what this series should be trying to do. It should be adequately like explaining weird plot threads like that, and like giving them new context, and just really exploring the characters and like their history, and like how things like actually develop, and how things like actually play out, because that was just awesome. I adored that. And there's a couple of more things like that, but in the story, but like overall, it's just kind of a slog to get through. I found myself just kind of bored of it, honestly. And this is like an adaptation of one of my favorite games ever. And I suppose this is one of my things with the Twilight Princess manga. I thought when I finished it was like this feeling of like, well, how good is Twilight Princess really? That's kind of like my thought. Like, every time I think about Twilight Princess as a manga, is that like, well, am I like really enjoying the manga for what it is, or like, am I just
a fan of the game, you know? Why the hell is the swivel not working? Like, am I just a fan of like that GameCube game? Why the hell is it twisted? With Twilight Princess, like the manga, like I do think that like although like it does share a lot in common with Ocarina when it comes to like, the weird plot changes, the weird characterizations, like some of the lore changes, some of the things they did. Like on the other hand, you have like absolute banger moments that like you never got to see in the original game, Like Link and Midna kissing twice, you know, once in it form is like some Kino 10 out of 10 moment that like I honestly thought I would never see in any official Nintendo product ever. They killed that sequence. They absolutely like there's just so much in Twilight Princess that happens that just is better than the game, like actually giving more context to Ganondorf as a character, expanding more on like the hero Shade and his role in the plot, and like, coming up with like some shockingly really well realized like original characters that were not in the original game, right? Like Twilight Princess, like in a lot of ways is kind of a refinement of this manga, and I think has really like gone to show. It really goes to show you just how much Akira Himakawa have developed as creators. Like working on these Zelda mangas, because like I felt that these series were mid for like a very, very, very long time, to the point where like, I had no interest in them at all. But after Twilight Princess, I'm a huge raving fan, and I hope like Twilight Princess is like a really strong indication of where we're going to go with the series from here. Like I do think it's very possible that we may see like a huge spike in interest from the Zelda like from Nintendo manga as Nintendo becomes more and more pronounced and popular. I expect we're going to see a lot more people picking these up. After the Zelda movie drops in 2027. Like it's going to be it's one of those things that's like gone way under the radar in the manga sphere. But I do think we do need to talk about this um, a little bit more because like it cannot be denied that like I do think like in a lot of ways the traditional jump model, the whole Dragon Ball like formula thing, it is like showing its age. It is like becoming less relevant. Like too many people have done the same thing and to like diminishing results. It's kind of crazy seeing how quickly My Hero Academia or like Jujutsu Kaisen fell off when like they really should have like been able to do something like new, interesting, fresh, exciting, and in reality, they're just like they're kind of doing the same thing. There's no innovation, there's no creativity. Like the only thing like keeping these series relevant is that they're newer and yet like just don't really have any real drive or ability to kind of to succeed. I think that's what we're going to see a lot of going forward. Is kind of like this transition away from the Dragon Ball formula. Spy Family is a really good indication of this. Like the biggest series in Jump right now, I believe, one of the biggest. Not a traditional like shonen battle series. It's a family comedy series. Stuff like this would never have done well in the West back in the day. But I think because of like the attack on the family unit, like the demonization of like strong male leads, like in a lot of ways, Agent Twilight is kind of like in defiance of typical Western trends when it comes to like how dads are portrayed in media. And so like to an American audience, like the series comes off as like extremely refreshing. I'm gonna have to like talk about that at a later date, but like I do think like the market is like ripe for like more alternative, like outside of the traditional space for manga. Like in the West, traditionally, like everything that got prominence here was like some Jump series. I do think that like in the next decade, we are gonna have to start talking about like um other companies, like a lot of which I would say are better. Like I think like what was Attack on Titan published in? Like was it Shonen Weekly? I don't remember the what the magazine is called right now, but like, they published Fire Force 2, and I kind of felt like when I was reading those series that like, yeah, this is way better than what Jump is producing. So like, I think there's going to be a lot more stuff like that. Like Call of the Night had a bit of a following when that was getting published. I mean, not that it's great or anything, but like I do think like now that the series is developing more, now that like the manga industry is expanding, now that like everybody pretty much agrees that like this stuff is better than comics. You know, yeah, I'm very curious if I would say this mediocre manga series is actually better than like the very best like Western comics has to offer. It's definitely better than Watchmen. Like way more appealing visually. Way better story. Way better characters. Like, yeah, but that's not saying much. Like, oh, it's better than Alan Moore. Wow, it's better than like one of the most overrated hacks in Western literature. So, well, anyway, like, my point, like, going through this book again, yeah, not great, honestly. Like reading Ocarina, like seeing all these problems, thinking about it, returning to it after like such a long hiatus, like it's very evident to me that Ocarina of Time really is something that deserved a much better adaptation. Um, like I feel like they did need to flesh out all the established characters. They really needed to give like more of an arc to them. They really needed to do more with it. Like the series seems like it's in love with the Kokiri stuff because I think the most fleshed out aspect of the adult arc is uh the Lost Woods and Saria and stuff like that. And then maybe the Spirit Temple. Like the other three are kind of neglected. And like the series seems to think that like I don't know, Link has this attachment to Zelda that I guess he doesn't have in the original game. Like I think the game seems to indicate that like he has a way more personal attachment to Saria. So like yeah, I kind of have like that kind of issue with it. Like there's just so many things like you can say about the series, but at the end of the day, it's like it's certainly not like a waste of time to read. It's not some fantastic like manga series. It's not going to change your life or anything, but like it's Ocarina of Time. It's an adaptation of a classic video game, something that I think is going to go down culturally as like some major, major milestone for the medium. So I think for that reason, this is absolutely something that's worth owning and picking up, especially if you're like me and are a hardcore fan of the franchise. Definitely, it's definitely not something I would like push people away from, but at the same time, like, yeah, go into it with like, reasonable expectations. Go into it like not expecting it to be exactly like the game. Expecting it to glaze over certain aspects. Expecting it to have weird pacing. Art that isn't like the best. But like, if you're willing to overlook all that, like, it is a fairly enjoyable afternoon. It's just something you can spend your time doing when you're waiting for the inevitable release of the next Zelda game.